Hello, lovers of Black true crime. Let me welcome you to the Noir Nation. If I asked you to name me three Black serial killers, could you do it? What about a Black person that's pulled off a heist of epic proportions? Don't worry, I couldn't either. But being a lover of true crime and all things Black, I decided to combine these two passions into a true crime podcast exploring some of the most intriguing and lesser known criminal masterminds with a melanated leading cast. Each week, I will bring you the stories of some of the most prolific criminals you've never heard of. I'm your host, Renee Davis, and this is the Melanin Mayhem podcast. Well, hello, Noir Nation. It's your favorite country girl back with another juicy episode for your listening pleasure. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are already on the Noir Nation bandwagon, y'all, welcome back. Today, we're going to go back in time a little bit, Noir Nation. Picture it, 1928, the Omaha, Nebraska area. The races are segregated. It's about a year before the Great Depression hits. Jobs are getting scarce out there, bit. And what jobs Black people had were being taken away and given to white people. Money is getting harder and harder to come by, and tensions are high. The phrase, get it how you live, was probably some real shit for some melanated people at that time. When everybody is broke, and your back is against the wall, y'all know shit started popping off. And I ain't saying it's right, but I am saying I might understand a little bit. This week's Melanin Mayhem maker, in my opinion, took his frustrations out on the people he felt were keeping him down. And his particular method for dealing with his frustrations, well, let's just say that they involved taking a hatchet to a bitch. Man, he had the envelopians in a motherfucking panic. This week's Melanin Mayhem maker is Mr. Jake Bird, a.k.a. the Tacoma Axe Killer, a.k.a. the Omaha Hatchet Man. A suave Negro with a taste for fancy haberdashery. That's a fancy word for saying somebody likes hats. Or what about a fancy man with a tall yarn? Those are just a few words that were descriptive for Mr. Jake Bird in the newspapers during the time, y'all. Records for Black people really weren't, kept up, so I don't have a whole lot of background information on Jake, but what I do know is that he was born December 14th, 1901 in Greenwood, Louisiana. His mama's name was Delia Bird, and his daddy's name was Charles Bird. As a product of the early 1900s, while there's no record of Jake attending school, I'm sure that he did attend like grade school, probably middle school. It might not have been called middle school back then, but he had some early childhood education. But what I do know is I'm sure he got an education from the School of Life. Y'all know, Hard Knocks University. Man, this didn't stop Jake from scratching out a living though. Around 19 years old, he left home to become a man, never to return again. Jake was a laborer, no surprise there, and he preferred to work on the railroad, laying tracks and shit. That kind of work kept him on the move, so he was never staying in one place for too long, you know what I'm saying? He was a real rolling stone. The authorities suspect Jake of stalking and killing white women in several different states due to the nature of his job and the crimes that he is suspected of committing. By the time they would find the victim, the offender was ghost. Baby, when I say Jake had they ass shook, I mean he had they ass shook. Look how they described the time when all of this was going on in the local newspaper. Quote, 40 squads of special police, nervously fingering brand new shotguns, patrolled the streets looking for the Axeman. For the second time in 2 years, Omaha was an armed camp in which the children, they were not permitted to go out on the streets after dark, and women, especially if they were young and attractive, they jumped every time a leaf tapped on their window. Now, why they had to call out the attractive people? So what, the ugly chicks didn't have nothing to worry about? Let me tell you, I've been kikiing Like, for real, Kiki and reading these old newspaper accounts. The way they describe stuff, and especially the way they describe melanated people, was a hot ass mess. I mean, they were basically reading us for filth back in the day. At least they dress it up a little bit better now. Just wait. I got some gems I'm gonna drop on you. I told you that they said he was a suave Negro with a taste for fancy haberdashery. Now, if you haven't guessed it by now, there was a nigga running around the Omaha, Nebraska area with axes and hatchets, chopping white folks to death. Like, how you wake up to somebody chopping on you like a tree? That's a hell of a way to wake up or to go. But here's the thing, somebody, purportedly a Negro, had killed 3 people already in Omaha in a 24-hour period starting on November 18th, 1928. The first victim was a man named J.W. Blackman. He was 75 years old, and his skull was crushed as he lay sleeping in his bed. The killer used the blunt side of the axe to just crush his body with blow after blow after blow. His body was described as being hammered and chopped about the head and covered up with a comforter. A hatchet stained with blood and a shoe was found behind the house, and his assailant stole $150 from the desk. Well, I guess he got $150. He can go buy him another pair of shoes. I mean, how you gonna run off with one shoe on and one shoe off? So many questions, but I digress. Our next victim was a twosome, Mrs. Walter Resso. She was 21 years old, mother of 3, who apparently stopped having a name the moment she said I do, because in every account I could find that was written up about these crimes, she is only referred to as Mrs. Walter Resso. Well, Greta Brown was the sister to Mrs. Walter Resso. She's 18 years old, and she was visiting her sister and fucked around and got caught up in some shit. See, the sisters got the sharp side of the axe. Mrs. Resso was married to the milkman. There's a joke there somewhere, but I ain't gonna go there. Mrs. Resso was married to the milkman, and when he came home from doing his route, he found his wife in the bed covered up with a comforter. He could see axe marks all over her head and neck, and she was naked. But fortunately, praise God, her babies, 9-month-old and 3 years old, were asleep in the crib next to the bed. Like, Jesus! Thank God he didn't mess with the babies, but thank also God that the babies slept through their mama being chopped up to death. Like, I'm sure she was screaming. I don't know. I would be screaming, but I digress again. So then Mr. Resso ran upstairs looking for his sister-in-law, and he found her covered up with a comforter too, with them same axe marks all over her face and neck, and she ain't had no clothes on either. So you see, like according to that account I quoted from the newspaper, the people of Omaha were on edge. It was an abomination that a Negro had the town up in arms the way that it was. Them white folks was madder than a motherfucker because that nigga had already gotten away with the shit 3 times. This nigga had them out there like the National Guard. Hundreds of extra police officers were sworn in just to hunt this nigga down. They said the city of Omaha had been divided into 100 sections, and those vigilante police officers that they just swore in, they patrolled them sections every 4 minutes. Please believe, just like they say the children and the pretty women were put up after dog, I bet most melanated people was also put up after dog for fear of being accused of being the goddamn hatchet man. You see, I'm gonna tell you how this shit went down, but you know, it didn't take much for a black person, guilty or not, to catch a charge and a conviction back in the day. So every black man in the town was a suspect and was guilty until proven innocent. So okay, Omaha's on edge. The anticipation of catching and hanging this nigga is at an all-time high. And then the goddamn hatchet man strikes again. 2 days later, it's the morning of November 20th, 1928. Harold Stribling and his wife, Mrs. Stribling, they are at home in their Carter Lake house, sleeping without a care in the world. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Somebody enters the Stribling's house with a hatchet. And if you come in the house with a hatchet, you got intent to kill or something. Let me tell you something. Whoever came in that house beat Harold's ass for old and for new. Man, they beat that man so bad that he was unconscious from November 20th, which was the day it happened, until November 26th. 7 whole days, and not a word from you. Come on, Tony Braxton. Y'all know I can sing a little bit in the shower. Even after he woke up on November 26th, he was in the hospital for several weeks before they released him, and he still had bandages all wrapped around his head, and he had a slight paralysis on his right side. The dude was fucked up. Now, the record says that Jake, after putting that thing on Harold, he spent a little more than an hour still in the house with Mrs. Stribling. Now her story is that after she heard her husband get the beat down, she got popped one time in the face, broke her nose, and then she jumps up and told Jake to stop, and he did. And then she said she defeated his attempt to assault her. Y'all know what assault her mean. Okay, ma'am. Sure. Here's a man that broke into your house, beat your husband to sleep, and you were able to stop him in his tracks with nothing more than harsh words? Get the fuck out of here. I know I wasn't around at the time, but based off what I have read and what I have seen depicted in the media, in those days, and I'm talking about way back in the day from like before 1990 and back, white women could have anything happen to them except the sexual penetration of a black man. You could get by with anything. You could get over anything. There was nothing that you could not overcome as a white woman. But baby, fuck around and get some black penis in your white vagina. Them white folks would rather sit naked in church before they admit to being raped by a black man. So again, Miss Stribling has defeated his attempts, but Harold is knocked out and Jake is supposedly still in the house with her and they just kicking the bobo. After sitting there for like an hour, hour and a half, they leave the house. Jake decides it's time for him to go and that Mrs. Stribling was going to go with him. So they march off walking. Miss Stribling got on a nightgown, a fur coat, and some slippers. A white woman with a black man walking through the woods in the dark of night. Baby, now they say Jake was headed to East Omaha where he lived. That's where the black folks lived in an area called the Bottoms. Now, wasn't that the same name of the area where the black folks lived in that show In the Heat of the Night? That used to be my favorite show back in the day. I used to love that. And I know Versatives used to always go down to the Bottoms. And that's where the black folks was. I guess that it was a regional thing. Everywhere you go, wherever the black folks is, we call that the bottom. Lord Jesus. Anywho, back to the story. So they walk around, and Miss Stribling think any second now she is going to die. But she says they walked for about a mile or two, and then Jake decides to let her go. And she did. She just walks away. She's walking around again in the wee hours of the morning. White woman in a nightgown and a fur coat. She stumbles across a policeman because remember, they everywhere, right? And according to the reporting at the time, she told that police officer that a Negro had walked into her home and forced her to go with him. The description she gave of her attacker was that he was about 28 years old. He weighed about 170 pounds, 5'10", with kinky hair. So they throw her in the police car and race back to her house. And when they get there, they see that her husband is there, fucked up. Mrs. Stribling ain't said a goddamn word about her husband. But they just attributed it that the reason she didn't bring him up was because she was so confused. Okay, ma'am, whatever. They take her to the hospital. Take him to the hospital. They're getting treatment. But the police are on their job. They start rounding up black people left, right, and sideways. And the first 5 black men they put their eyes on, they snatched their ass up and brought them in for a lineup. Now, mind you, they are doing these lineups in person. In Mrs. Stribling's hospital room, it was a revolving door of black men. Like they literally would bring them in, young, old, and everything in between. And she'd be like, nope, nope, nope. And they say that Jake was amongst those people that were brought in and she didn't recognize him, right? Well, a little bit of time goes on, and I'm talking about 4 or 5 days, they arrested Jake. And speaking of this arrest, the newspaper, the Des Moines Register from November of 1942, says that when they arrested Jake, he was only dressed in his underwear. Like, what the fuck was his clothes? So when I say they snatched his ass up, they snatched that ass up. They didn't even let him put on some clothes. The inhumanity of it all, y'all. At least let that man put some pants and some shoes on. So this is the 40s. Imagine Jake standing in the victim's hospital room in his drawers. And Mrs. Stribling says, that's the man that did it. They say Jake told her, ma'am, I don't know you. And Miss Stribling said, I kept my promise. But now that they got you, why don't you own up to it like a man? I bet you sorry you didn't kill me now, ain't you? Bitch, what? Like I am a fully grown woman and I am fully dressed and I feel a little indignant and I didn't do shit. I can't imagine standing in my drawers having to defend myself. Whether or not this is a case of all black people look alike or Jake really did that shit, Mrs. Stribling did not change her story. Once she picked his ass out, he was her man. So somebody has killed 3 people in Nebraska, right? But the 4th and 5th victims, the Striblings, they lived in Iowa. Carter Lake is in Iowa. What's interesting about this is Carter Lake is completely in Nebraska, but it is considered Iowa. if you look at it on a map, like pull out your map right now, pull up on your phone, Carter Lake, Iowa, you see it? It is clearly inside the boundary of Nebraska. But here's a little history fact to it for you. See, originally the plan was back in the day that the Missouri River determined the boundary between Nebraska and Iowa. Okay, great. Big ass river. You stay on your side, I stay on my side. The river divides us. Fine. But then in 1877, a big ass flood hit and the river was swollen and overflew its banks and water was everywhere. And the river changed its course a little bit. After the waters subsided, it made a little enclave and they called that enclave Carter Lake. Nebraska was on some, okay, Carter Lake is our shit. Iowa was like, no, the boy is mine. So they took that shit to court. And the courts decided that the land, Carter Lake, belonged to Iowa. So, immediately from 1877, this was the start of some bad blood between these two states. Omaha, Nebraska now is looking for the Axeman. He strikes again. This time he strikes in Carter Lake, which is in Nebraska, but not Nebraska's. So the Omaha police are like, yeah, we got his ass now. But when he was arrested, he wasn't taken to jail in Nebraska. He was taken to jail in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Omaha was pissed. Oh my Lord, they was pissed. And Iowa didn't give two shits. The two victims weren't killed. The striplings, they didn't die. They're alive. So the charges that Jake is going to face are going to be way lesser than the charges he would have been looking at in Nebraska. In Nebraska, he was going to die. In Iowa, he got a 30-year sentence at max. So the Iowa victims are not dead. The Nebraska victims are dead. However, the only witness to the crimes in Nebraska was a 3-year-old boy that belonged to one of the victims. And even amongst the most racist, most corrupt, they're not going to put a 3-year-old child on the stand. All Omaha had was allegations against Jake and an assumption that Jake did it. But that's all they really needed in 1928. Fuck all that hard evidence and shit. If they said you did that shit, you did that shit. So Iowa charges him with 1 count of assault with intent, which came with a 30-year sentence, like I said. Nebraska was on some, this nigga killed 3 people. We want to hang his ass, right? But they couldn't get Iowa to hand him over. So that's how Jake managed to escape his first death penalty. Again, I cannot state to you how much Nebraska was upset about this situation. They tried everything that they could to get their hands on Jake, but they physically could not get to Jake to serve him with a writ of habeas corpus. And you use that when you want to bring a prisoner before the court to challenge the custody. Who got custody of him, right? Kind of like a child. Who got custody of the child? Because he was in Iowa, Nebraska wanted him to be in custody in Omaha, Nebraska. But you have to serve somebody with a writ of habeas corpus. They couldn't physically serve Jake because they couldn't find Jake's ass, right? Iowa, it appears, was ignoring them. But I don't know. It might not have been that Iowa was ignoring Nebraska deliberately. It could have been just that Nebraska was sending the writ to a jail that Jake was no longer at. You see, they had to keep moving Jake to different jails because while Iowa didn't want to give Jake up, that didn't mean they was all kumbaya either. The good peoples of Iowa was on some mob justice kind of time. Jake the Negro had assaulted a white woman and almost killed a white man. They wanted to hang his ass just as bad as Omaha, Nebraska did. But the lawmen in Iowa, they followed the law and they did not let anything happen to Jake, which is a rarity. So they put Jake's ass on tour. They bounced his ass around from jail to jail, county to county, all over the state of Iowa. So no one ever knew for sure where he was exactly. But here's a plot twist. After the Striblings were attacked on November 27th, 1928, a black man in Spokane, Washington, who, get this y'all, he was described as a husky mulatto with jet black hair combed straight back, and it's not kinky. Ooh, the shade of it all. What the fuck is a husky mulatto? That just mean his mama was white? Whatever. This husky mulatto man named Elmer Williams was confessing to the murders of Greta Brown and her sister, Mrs. Walter Resso. Remember her? Yep, you heard me. Oh, Elmer was 24 years old and he had been detained by the Spokane, Washington police. Why was he detained? Well, because a couple of kids turned his ass in to the police. According to 2 teenage boys that was just standing on the corner minding their own business, a black man comes up to them and ask if they want to make a nickel. Okay, y'all, it's 1928. A nickel went a hell of a long way back then. The boys say, hell yeah, we want to do it. What we got to do? So the man say he want them to write a letter for him. So they go get a pencil and a piece of paper, and the man says, write this down. And then he says, quote, Dear sir, in regards to the man you have under arrest, which was Jake, on the charge for killing Mrs. Walter Resso and Miss Greta Brown, before you prosecute an innocent party, and then he stops. The boys, one of the little, one writing, one listening, they listening to this shit and they was like, what the fuck? So one of the boys kept Elmer busy continuing to write, and the other boy ran off and found a police officer and told him what was going down. The police comes back to where Elmer and the other little boy are waiting, and they take Elmer in for questioning. Elmer has a newspaper clipping of the Resso Brown murder in his pocket. What? The Spokane police say Elmer confessed to the murders. He said he killed them on November 18th, and then he dipped out of town the next day, but only after several hundred men chased him through a cornfield. But he shook their ass and jumped on a train headed to Denver. When he got to Denver, he got rid of his clothes and he kept it pushing. Spokane police thought he was insane. He sounds like it. They reached out to Omaha, though, because, we got a situation here, and before we just discount it, let's at least let these people know what's going on. So they letting Omaha know the situation they got here. We got a guy that's confessing to some crimes in your neck of the woods. He don't match the description of the assailant in Omaha, though. And I'm sorry, but Elmer's elevator doesn't go to the top floor. He's a few sandwiches short of a picnic. Ain't no other way to put it. Because you see, Elmer had escaped from an insane asylum. Yeah, like for real crazy. So the people at the hospital, they said that Elmer was the type to confess to anything, and that he was mentally unbalanced. The reason that he was in the asylum in the first place was because he had attacked his mama, his white mama. So, doing their due diligence, the Omaha detectives did go to Spokane to check Elmer out for themselves, and they did determine that he was not their man. Jake was their man. But they don't have Jake. Iowa has Jake. And there is nothing that Omaha can do about it. Well, when Jake went to trial at the Potawatomi County Courthouse in Council Bluffs, Iowa, on January 28, 1929, it was the trial of the century, baby. When I tell you it was the talk of the town, it was the talk of the town. That was the hottest ticket going if you could get in, like the Serious Club. Y'all, I'm talking Iowa in the winter. It's January. It was sub-zero temperatures, and them white folks was up at the crack of dawn waiting in line to get in the courthouse. It was such a big deal that the local high school, one of the classes actually took their students to the courthouse to see the goddamn trial. They say they were selling seats for $2.50. Now, that was a nice piece of change in 1929. Shit, that was almost a down payment on a house. Jake was funny. He said he didn't know why they was putting him on trial because they had already tried and convicted him before the trial had even started. But he did participate in the trial. His story was that he was at the gambling house when the Striblings got, and he had a dozen witnesses get on the stand and say that he was at the pool hall with them. He even had a waitress that worked at this cafe. There was a cafe in front of the pool hall. A waitress that worked at that cafe, she sent a letter to the court saying that she had seen Jake on November 20th around 3 in the morning, but that she had moved to Topeka, Kansas, so she couldn't be there in person for the trial, which is why she sent a letter. Jake was like, somebody is trying to frame me, because guess what? Jake had 2 police officers that said they saw Jake at the cafe that was attached to the pool room. He even had the lady that ran the rooming house where he rented a room at to testify that she had seen him in his room at 3 o'clock in the morning when he came to get some more money to gamble with. But y'all know, it was not to be. They described Jake's witnesses as his Negro friends. Dog whistle much. And also, all of his witnesses were from Omaha. They were testifying in a trial in Iowa. Them white folks was on some, I don't know him either. Y'all remember The Color Purple when Sophia wanted to stay for Thanksgiving, but Miss Millie didn't know how to drive that car? I don't know him either. That's what Iowa told Jake. We don't know them niggas. Now, the witnesses for the prosecution, and one but 3. One of them said she woke up the night that the Striblings was attacked. She heard a loud noise, and when she jumped up, she said she went and checked, and her hatchet was missing from the woodshed. Ma'am, how fuck get up in the middle of the night and go check the goddamn woodshed? Okay, ma'am, what else you know? She said a little while later, a man came to her door trying to get her to open up, and she pulled out her peacemaker and told him, "Don't make me use this. Don't make me do peace be still on your ass." She said he looked just like Jake. And when she went out on her porch after he was gone, there was her hatchet. It was just laying there on the porch. Okay, ma'am. Then there was Detective Sergeant Joe Podak. He was the chief of the Moral Squad of the Omaha Police Department. Baby, what the fuck is a Moral Squad? It was a hell of a time in the 20s. Let me tell you something. If they had morals police right now, some of us would be locked up for a long ass time. But anyway, Detective Chief Hall Monitor Joe, he said that them Negroes that testified for Jake, they was all liars, pimps, and thieves. They had bad reputation and questionable morals. Let him tell it. It wasn't no partition or nothing up that separated the pool hall from the cafe, and he had just so happened to be walking by on that same night, and the cafe was closed. The lights was off, wasn't nobody in there. All them niggas is lying. And then last but not least, Mrs. Stribling testified that Jake was the man that attacked her and her husband. Check this out, though. Follow me now. At this point in history, lifting fingerprints at a crime scene is a thing, right? This is not some new science. They've been doing it for a while. The police spent a whole lot of time in the Stribling house collecting evidence. Jake is supposed to have spent like 3 hours in these people's house. And you mean to tell me he ain't leave not one fingerprint? Well, he might have, but don't nobody know because the police didn't even compare Jake's fingerprints to anything that they collected from that house. And when the state was questioned about why this was the way it was, they said that the fingerprints were taken 3 days after the crime and too many people had been in and out of the house. Well, why y'all letting people in and out of the house, contaminating the crime scene? Plus, then Miss Stribling went on to say, well, you know, Jake didn't touch nothing in the house while he was in there. He just kind of told me to move shit around for him. Oh, okay. They also never found any bloody clothes. I'm just saying, if you hack a bitch to death, you gonna be bloody. Where them clothes at? I don't know. Did Jake really do these crimes? I really don't know. He has a gang of people saying that he was with them. I mean, I know you can get your boy or your girl to tell a good hot lie for you. Sure, that ain't no problem. But to get a dozen motherfuckers that ain't related to you, a waitress that don't even live in the state to write a letter to the court, like that's a good long distance lie. That lie costs money. She had to buy paper and envelopes and a stamp. I mean, he even had a couple of cops. Even though the cops were black, they're still cops. Again, is this another one of those situations, all black folks look alike rearing its cliched head again? I don't know. But a basketball team of witnesses against 3 people sounds like a not guilty verdict to me. Well, it took about a week for the trial to run its course. And that Saturday morning, when the case went to the jury, the judge told them that they had 6 choices to choose for a verdict. They could do assault with intent to 1, commit murder, commit manslaughter, great bodily injury. They could do assault and battery. They could do simple assault, or they could do not guilty. And right before they went out to deliberate, the last thing the judge told them was, quote, alibis can be manufactured easily. Sir, what the fuck is that? On February 2nd, 1929, the jury deliberated for about 2.5 hours before they found Jake guilty, and they sentenced him to 30 years at the Fort Madison Penitentiary. It wasn't no way they was gonna let Jake slide on this shit. Not to mention, y'all, I don't know if y'all heard me, but the verdict came in on a Saturday. Them motherfuckers put overtime on this shit. Not in 29, you will not be out here hatcheting these good white folks. Hell, 2024 for that matter. They were gonna go back and try him for Mrs. Stribling's attack, but Mrs. Stribling told them, you know what, I don't have the heart to go through this anymore. Just let that shit go. So they did. Jake did 12 of them 30 years after you factor in the good behavior time, and he gets out of prison in 1941. He bounces around for a little bit, but what I'm wondering is, why didn't Omaha scoop him up? I mean, I know that they knew he was getting out. There was no statute of limitations on murder. They done had the peoples all up in arms, and Jake is our man for all this time. Now that he is out of prison, y'all just gonna let it go? I guess they did. It's like Jake got a second chance to start a new life. You know, turn over a whole new leaf. He turned over something, all right. 2 years later, they caught his ass breaking into a house with a hatchet. Sir, why you got a hatchet in your hands? This was in St. Joseph, Michigan in 1943. Jake did a little bit of the Matrix on that crime, and he did a little time at the county jail. And when he got out, he dipped on up out of Michigan. The next time we hear about Jake, he is in Washington State, Tacoma, Washington to be exact. It's October 30th, 1947. It's late. I'm talking like 2, 3 in the morning late. You know that time of night when everything is just quiet. Bertha Clunt and her daughter Beverly are sleeping soundly in their bed, and all seems fine till the neighbors wake up hearing what it sounds like somebody screaming bloody murder. Old Jake is on the prowl. He on a mission, y'all, and he heads to one specific house. Did he scope it out prior to? Probably. The back door isn't locked, so Jake came right on in. He was intending on robbing the place, right? I guess, maybe. This would be easy money. But before he went in, he stopped at a shed and grabbed an axe, just in case anybody wanted that smoke, you know. So then he sneak into the house. He takes off his shoes so they don't make no noise. He go in Bertha's room. He scooped up some money out her pocketbook, a whole $1.50. Tiptoes back out her room. Back in the kitchen, he getting ready to put his shoes back on, and he turn around, and there go Bertha. Jake say, hey, I don't want no problems. Let me just get my shoes, and I'm gonna be on up out your way. Then boom, Beverly pops up from behind him and pops him upside his head. God damn it, you don't fuck with my mama. Beverly and Jake get to tussling, and then the next thing you know, Bertha and Beverly are dead, chopped with an axe. Now, mind you, Bertha and Beverly are screaming like some real white women. It's the wee hours of the morning in a white neighborhood, and some white women is screaming like they being killed. Of course, the neighbors, they heard that shit, and the next thing you know, the phone started blowing up at the local police station. Ring, ring. Hello, police? Somebody over here screaming. Come quick. I don't feel safe. And baby, they did. Tacoma jumped in their cars and flew to the location. Well, I guess Jake heard the sirens and realized that he needed to bounce. Dude didn't even stop to put his shoes on. He just ran out the back door. The only problem was the cops was already there and they saw his ass. A Negro running out the back of a white lady's house in 1947? Oh, no. Call it racial profiling, call it standard operating procedures, call it whatever you want. Either way, they chased Jake's ass down. And Jake tried his best not to go down without a fight. He jugged one of the cops with a switchblade, and then he broke the other one's nose. Bam! And then they Rodney King that ass. Man, it wasn't nothing but nightsticks, elbows, and shoe leather going on at that point. So while Jake is getting his ass whooped, more police arrive, and they start looking into the house, and there's Bertha Clunt, 53 years old, and her daughter Beverly, hacked to death. Bertha's head is almost decapitated clean off her body. They reported that an attempt had been made to rape Bertha. What the fuck is an attempt? I think I'm gonna call bullshit on these attempts at rape. I'm doing air quotes. Like, how in this confession, if this is really how the shit went down, at what point did he have time to try to get that kitty? In between whacks with the axe? No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. If he's this murderer of white people that they say he is, Jake's ass was gonna get them draws before he took the axe to him. All that attempted rape shit, that's cap. I know we shield the victim sometime, and they did some heavy shielding back in the days because, again, that stigma of black penile penetration. Y'all, I ain't saying that Jake is a good guy. Please believe I ain't saying that. What I am saying is that he was a raping raper that raped, as well as a murdering murderer that murdered. And speaking of murder, a axe nigga? Like, not a knife or a gun, but an axe? Fuck but a lumberjack uses an axe. Y'all know when you buy the knife set, for your kitchen, sometimes they'll throw a cleaver in there depending on what type of knife set that you're buying. I have bought a many a knife sets over my lifetime. I have yet to use that goddamn cleaver. I'll use every last one of the knives except that one. Shit, my meat already come cleaved. Like, even the hand and arm motion is all wrong to me. I might cut a bitch. Jug you 1-2 times to back you up off me. But I ain't gonna chop a bitch. That's a cold way to die. Like, will you stop chopping me? Will you get that knife and jug me properly? Think about it. When was the last time you heard a bitch being chopped to death? Probably not until now when you hear me tell you this story about this prolific nigga named Jake. So after they got through whooping Jake's ass, they took his whipped ass to the hospital, and the doctor said, "Oh, he fine. You can take him on to jail." And off to jail he went. And according to the cops, he swore out his confession, they wrote it up, and Jake signed it. But could he read, though? Because some accounts say that Jake was illiterate, but whatever, he signed what they put in front of him. They charge him with first-degree murder, and the very next day he goes before a judge. And the law in Tacoma at the time was that no matter how many charges you are charged with in a case, this case being first-degree murder, the state is only going to charge you for one count. The reason was, if they didn't win, they could always come back and charge you for the other count. So in Jake's case, if they didn't get the conviction for Bertha, they could come back and charge him for Beverly later. So Jake gets a court-appointed attorney, a dude that used to be the district attorney. Jake pleads not guilty, and they set his trial date for November 24th, 1947. So his attorney tried to get a change of venue. He said this nigga can't get no fair trial here. Denied. The court-appointed attorney then tried to get off the case because Jake wanted to represent himself. This nigga don't need my help. He said he got it. Denied. The court is going to start on time as scheduled. You ain't going nowhere. So, even though Jake wanted to represent himself, nothing is going to stop this trial from starting on November 24th. And on November 24th, it absolutely started. They picked the jury that day, and now it's time to get down to business. The following morning, on November 25th, 1947, the prosecution called their first witness. The prosecution's case was that they found Bertha and Beverly with their heads bashed in and axe chops all over their body. Jake had blood and brain matter on his clothes. His fingerprints was found in the house and on the axe, and the cops saw him run out the back door. Oh, and he left his shoes in the house. So, Ray Charles could see where this was heading. They said that this murder was premeditated, so Jake should get the death penalty. Now, the defense did bring up the ass whooping that Jake got. And the state put the cops that whooped that ass on the stand. And they said, they lost it. We lost it. It was a very gruesome crime scene. And it was a little too much. And he was sitting over there skinning and grinning and shit. And when we asked him why he did it, he said he didn't do it. And he didn't know what we were talking about. And we just kind of lost it a little bit. And the next thing you know, our nightsticks were just jugging his ass. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I lost myself. I ain't gonna never do it no more. Okay, Mr. Police Officer. I ain't saying what he did was right, but I understand just a teeny tiny bit. I mean, it ain't every day you see a bitch axed to death. I mean, an axe murder scene. I might lose my shit a little bit too. Anywho, the defense tried to get the confession thrown out. They said, they had just beat his ass. Of course, that confession was coerced. Jake would have said anything to keep them from unleashing the dragon on his ass again. The court was like, nope. There is no relationship between that monkey stomping Jake's ass just got and the confession he gave a little bit later. Keep this shit moving. And so the defense was like, okay, we see where this is going, and they didn't call any witnesses, and Jake's ass definitely didn't go nowhere near that witness stand. He said, I'm gonna be the strong, silent type. Shit, I would too. Baby, a day later, the trial was over. Talk about a speedy trial, but I guess it really was rather cut and dry. November 26, 1947, a day and a half after the start of the trial, the lawyers give their closing arguments and the case goes to the jury. Don't y'all know that shady ass jury deliberated all of 30 minutes before they came back with a guilty verdict and a recommendation for the death penalty? Their asses was home in time to make lunch. Well, on December 6th, 1947, they set his execution date for January 16th, 1948. See, back in the day, it wasn't all that we gonna let this shit go out for years and years and years. This was some bam, bam, bam. You did this shit on Tuesday, we gonna try you on Wednesday, and you gonna hang on Thursday. But here's where things get a little interesting. At that court appearance, where they're telling him what his execution date was, Jake had a few choice words for the court. He said that they had denied him a fair trial, that his lawyer was in cahoots with the prosecution, but Jake was not done with their asses. After hearing his death date, he said to the judge, all you guys that had anything to do with this case will die before I do. You policemen and judges will be sitting and waiting at the pearly gates a long time before I roll up. Baby Jake done put a hex on the courtroom. Till you do right by me. I wonder did Celie know Jake? I'm sorry, no more color purple. I'm through with it. I'm through with it now. Man, that shit had them white folks so shook that they actually named it the Jake Bird Hex. Look it up. It's a thing. And here's the kicker. Them motherfuckers started dropping like flies. Judge Hodge, he died a month later. Heart attack. His people say he was healthy as a horse and just dropped dead one day. The undersheriff, man named Joe Carpock, he died of a heart attack a few weeks later. The chief court clerk, man named Ray Scott, he died a few days after the undersheriff did. They say this dude never missed a day of work until the day he dropped dead of a heart attack. The lead detective on the case, Detective Sherman Lyons, died of a heart attack a couple of days later. Jake's court-appointed attorney, J.W. Selden, the one who Jake said was in cahoots with the prosecution, he dies a few months later. And then a guard at the penitentiary, well, who was part of the transportation crew, a man named Arthur Stewart, he died of pneumonia just before Jake's execution. Baby, till you do right by me. Even though he put a hex on the court, Jake still felt the need to unburden himself. On his way to the penitentiary, this man starts confessing to murder after murder after murder that took place over a 20-year period. But I know what Jake was trying to do. He was trying to use that shit as leverage to get a stay of execution. And it worked. He got a couple of reprieves in exchange for him clearing a few unsolved cases off the books across the United States. Because remember, Jake worked for the railroad. So he was truly a rolling stone, gathering nothing but bodies apparently. Lawmen from all over was flocking to Washington State Prison. Everybody wanted to talk to Jake. They wanted to ask him questions, get some details. All in all, Jake confessed to 44 murders, but they were only able to connect him by evidence to 11 of them. But he knew too much about the crimes in the other ones to not be suspect number one. Like, goddamn, Jake. 44 murders plus the 6 I presented in this story. Nigga, that's 50 murders. You really are a murdering murderer that murdered. When I tell you, he had bodies in Illinois, Kentucky, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Kansas, South Dakota, Ohio, Florida, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, and Washington State. Like, god damn, was you trying to hit all 50 states, dude? Now, these law enforcement agencies were able to close all of these unsolved cases thanks to Jake. As long as he was giving up the murders, he could stay alive. Well, you know, eventually the well of murders, it runs dry and the execution was back on. So the court-appointed attorney, he filed one appeal on Jake's behalf. And then when it was denied, he sent a request to the court. He said, look, y'all, I done did everything I can do for this nigga. It ain't nothing else I can do in my power. So if you wouldn't mind, can you please remove me as his counsel of record? Me and this nigga is done. We done broke up. And so the court, they did. They removed him from being Jake's attorney. But that shit didn't faze Jake one bit. Because Jake was like, you know what? See you, nigga. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. And after that, Jake started defending himself in between confessing the crimes all over the U.S., that is. Now, don't get it twisted. Just because Jake was in prison and he had a limited education, that didn't stop him from setting up shop as the go-to prison lawyer. Hell, Jake represented himself all the way to the Supreme Court when he had to file his own appeal after his attorney dropped his ass. That nigga definitely used what he had to get what he wanted. No matter at what point you search in history, there's usually always a group of some sort that helps people behind bars with legal assistance, right? The clemency groups. Jake used them to his advantage too, and he was able to delay that death sentence from being carried out for more than a year. You know he had to be doing some good talking, because baby, they was ready for that ass to be so dead. So dead, I'm talking about everybody. The governor of Iowa was in the newspapers talking about this nigga still alive. You know, Iowa had him first, and then it came out that there was a man locked up in an Iowa prison that maybe wasn't supposed to be there because Jake had done did that goddamn crime. So Iowa was like, look, we're ready for him to die. What y'all waiting on, Spokane? Every appeal Jake filed was denied. The clemency group gave Jake another lawyer. He filed some appeals. They were denied. This nigga gonna die. Y'all might as well stop. Baby, 125 people showed up for Jake's execution. He didn't say nothing to the spectators, but in true audacious nigga form, he had prepared some remark that he gave to the chaplain to read on his behalf. So Jake is up there, he got the rope around his neck, and the chaplain starts reading from the paper that Jake wrote. Basically, he was saying, you know what, y'all, I'm good. I ain't gonna hold this against y'all. We ain't gonna have no bad blood. I ain't got no hatred in my heart for y'all. Do you know the guard or whoever was in charge of pulling the rope had no chill? In the midst of the chaplain reading Jake's last words, they just popped open the trapdoor that was underneath Jake's feet and off the swinging he went. Like, you dirty motherfuckers. Y'all could have let that man hear his last words without trying to get some breath in and listen at the same goddamn time. The level of pettiness here is like on 1,000. Jake was hanged on July 15, 1949, on the steps of the penitentiary. He was 47 years old, and according to his death certificate, it took him 14 minutes to die. Ooh, child, that is a long goddamn time. 14 minutes to be swinging through the air with a rope around your neck? I know one thing. Today's necks ain't made like them ancestral necks. Shit. Our asses got about 5 minutes tops before we deader than a motherfucker. Like, how you watch somebody die for 14 minutes? Well, I guess we kind of know a little bit because we did watch George Floyd die for 9. But hanging and swinging? I mean, I know humans have watched executions since the beginning of time. But in my lifetime, I've only known about or seen the electric chair or lethal injection be used as the method of how the death penalty is carried out, right? And both of those methods are pretty damn quick. You don't have time to run to the store or fix a sandwich. You know what I'm saying? Jake's ass hung on long enough for me to run to Walmart right quick. Maybe that's why they kept changing the method of death over the years. Somebody realized this too goddamn long. What can we do to speed this shit up? Another interesting tidbit is Jake was hanged at the stroke of midnight and pronounced dead at 12:14 a.m. Jake was buried on the prison grounds in an unmarked grave. The only marker had his inmate number on it, number 21520. Say what you say about Jake, but even in death, he was taking care of his business. He must not have had any family or nothing, so to speak, but he didn't want to leave no loose ends. The little money he had, a whopping $6.15, he put in his will that it was supposed to go to his appeals attorney, a man named Mr. Murray Tackhart. That was from the Clemency Group. You know what? I ain't got nobody, but you been good by me, white man. When I leave here, you can have what I got. Shit, it won't cover what you done spent in time on me, but you know, it'll get you something a little nice. Anywho, and that, New Orleans Nation, is the story of Jake Bird, aka the Tacoma Axe Killer. Wasn't that a trip? Like, wow. They don't make them like that no more for sure. They don't ask no more. They don't ask no more. Okay, no more goody mob. I'm through. I'm through. I hope you enjoyed our little trip back in time to learn about a man that did some prolific shit that you'd never heard before. As always, I hope that you have enjoyed the tale of Jake Bird. And if you did, I would love it if you left me a review wherever you are listening to this podcast at right now. You can even just hit the 5-star button if you don't even feel like typing. We ain't even gonna put nothing on you. No pressure, no pressure. Then I need you not to keep this to yourself. I need you to be free with your love of the podcast and spread it all around to your friends and your family and your coworkers, right? Be free. And if you are on social media, you can find me on Twitter at Melanin Mayhem PC and on Facebook and Instagram at the Melanin Mayhem Podcast. As always, if you know of a melanated mayhem maker that you would like for me to do an episode on, drop me a line over at melaninmayhempodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, I want you guys to stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. It's one love, New Orleans Nation, and I'm out. Wow.